without further ado, I would like to welcome you all to our inaugural World of Drones Education and World of Drones and Robotics Congress live webinar with some superstars from the drone industry. And I'm really grateful to have these people with us here today, knowing that it's very busy times for a lot of us, even though we're in ISO. We're ISO busy. And I'm really looking forward to hearing their thoughts on how things are going within the drone industry now, and also in the near term and also the longer term future, particularly from an Australian context. One of the things that was discussed this week during a Peter Switzer program that I was on was this idea of what letter do you think the Australian economic boom is going to look like after COVID-19 pandemic fizzles out in the Asia Pacific region. Will it be a W? Will it be a U? Will it be an L? What kind of shape will that actually look like? I'm not an economist, so I can't grab at anything. All I know is that I have a lot of interest in projects that are being pushed to quarter four. So quarter four 2020 for me from an Australian context looks like it's going to be pretty busy. And I'm wondering if some of our panelists today might agree with me on that one. The way this is going to run is that each of our panelists will have 5 minutes or so to maybe talk about a project they've been working on now, a thought, an idea, a project they've got going on for the future, something that might interest them, that they think might interest you. We'll then have some of the Q&A with some of the questions that have already been submitted, and then any questions that you might also have. Okay, then we'll have a bit of a random chat, a bit of a final thoughts, and then we'll close off and get ready for the next one. So hopefully we will have another one of these events in about a month's time. So we'll make sure we let you all know about that. Now I have some intros in front of me here that I'm going to read through radio style. And what I might do is a very quick intro of everybody and then start again from the beginning and get everyone's thoughts as we go. So we've got Jen here, who's a photographer and video producer from Industrial Photo and Video, a commercial photographer and video producer whose clients operate in the defence, aviation, manufacturing and heavy industry sectors. And also she does very hilarious Instagram videos. I had to throw that in, Jen. Jen sees drone photography and video as a gateway drug to other drone operations for her clients. She also works with artists, technologists and gamers to help incorporate drone footage into virtual reality and augmented reality experiences for her clients. Very keenly interested in ways that approved operators can get better flight access in controlled airspace, Jen was the first person to get approval to fly a drone at Brisbane Airport right over the new runway. Jen believes drones will be one of the most important aspects of her business moving forward, particularly post-COVID. We also have Andrew here, who's one of the directors and the CTO at AUAV, looking after all aspects of their technology and development. AUAV being one of our most successful drone companies in Australia, been around for a while as well, Andrew, so it's good to see you still going strong. We've got Jackie here from Hover UAV. Jackie is one of my heroes, and I mention her at every opportunity I possibly can. Jackie's got a wide and diverse background, and I may actually ask you to summarize that, Jackie, because I feel like if I talk about some of the things I know that you're known for, it's not actually necessarily what you're going to be working on, because you've been evolving and moving so quickly. But Hover is one of Australia's leading drone consultancy and drone services company. One of the claims to fame I would say about Jackie is the shark detection work that happened in northern New South Wales, and Jackie's team developing the first shark alarm on a drone, which was a brilliant thing to see. We've got Rob here as well. Last but absolutely not least, Rob has started a startup into a scale-up into, and I don't know what you are, global domination, I think. Rob is the next stage. Director of Mirigin Unmanned Systems, a drone consultancy and project management firm. Mirigin helps organizations successfully implement their drone programs to help save lives, reduce costs, or increase capacity. Mirigin has a particular focus on defense and emergency services organizations, with Rob having a background in army aviation, engineering, and project management, as well as a passion for using technology to make the world a better place. Now, I hope I didn't embarrass anyone, because I couldn't see your faces while I was reading that on my Google Doc. But I'd like to ping pong straight back to our Jen. Jen, here we are. What a world we're living in. Where do you see your work right now, and what sort of hopes and ideas do you have for a post-COVID-19 drone industry in Australia?
Yeah, thanks for the intro. Definitely, I think that one of the things that very early on in the COVID issue, all of my clients who are very heavy defence manufacturing clients, they all supply helicopters or tanks or whatever to the Defence Force. They all got a letter from the Australian government saying your requirement to increase Australian industry content in the stuff that you deliver to us moving forward is going to significantly increase. So I think going forward, one of the biggest things that we're going to see is this sort of inward focus on Australian manufacturing and Australian technology and Australian kind of thought or invention, if you like. So I think that traditionally those cost drivers around China to have things cheaply and delivered quickly and delivered really for the lowest possible price, I think being able to deliver an Australian product is going to slightly edge that out for a while until we all forget about the trauma of COVID-19. So I think we've got a really good opportunity now to deliver and to develop products that the Australian government particularly wants. And I think in terms of the way that works with drone technology is that, for example, one of my clients is a quarry quarry consultancy firm. They're in court at the moment in trying to get an approval through for increasing the size of their quarry. The court has to do a site visit. Obviously, they can't do a site visit, so how does that work? Well, what they have to do is do a virtual site visit. So that means that we, as drone operators, have to understand what drones can do to augment an experience that we were already having in person that we can no longer have in person, and not just thinking about how we can replicate or replace that in-person experience, but what we can do to make it even better. So, for example, on this quarry, it's a massive quarry. You've got a court that's got 15 to 20 people that want to go onto that site, you know, everyone from judges to legal associates to assistants who've never even seen a pair of steel cap boots, let alone stepped on site, and you've got 15 people just aimlessly wandering around a site. Well, that's not safe. So how do we, as a drone operator or drone operators, create that experience for the court, as an example, in order to give an experience that's even better than what it would have been had they been on site? So that's one of the things I think. And also I think in terms of, if you look at art, you know, people are not able to go to live venues. They're not able to have experiences in person anymore. So how are we able to create experiences that are still one to many, but where you can't get the many together?
I think it's been some years now since drone footage was first used in that case in New South Wales, with all the guy that was keeping all the cars and all the junk on his land, and he wouldn't let them have access. So they flew the drone over and did the actual counting of all of the vehicles and gave much more accurate access. I remember as well, in terms of the court, looking at ways in which, I think it was Ipswich City Council I was talking to at the time, and there was a woman who'd been traumatised by trying to access someone's land who'd greeted her with a shotgun, I think. And she was a bit traumatized by it. And it was just trying to get access to look at something with a fence line or something they'd had to do. And she sort of turned to me in that briefing and said, "Do you mean to tell me we could have done all of this with a drone and I didn't need to go to that person's front door and I never needed to see that man?" And I'm like, yeah, actually. So, I mean, do you think this is going to accelerate that now to become more business as usual?
I think industries that have never thought about it before are being forced to think about it now. So, for example, you know, the Land and Environment Court has traditionally been, if you want a site visit, all of us have to go to the site. We've all got to see the site. We've all got to see exactly the same thing. And it's like, well, if you can't do that, what do you do instead? So I think people are, you know, and it's true with this working from home phenomenon, you know, disability advocates have been saying for ages, why can't we work from home? They're like, can't possibly be done. And now everyone's at home. So I think it accelerates that, but it also forces people to shift their mindset in a way that they've just said before, well, that's just not possible. And it's like, well, if you want to keep earning money and you want to keep working, you just have to shift what you think is possible.
I like the cut of your jib. Andrew, how are things going for you? You seem very busy. You're always pumping out some great social media from AUAV of some of the cool projects that you're working on. So how are things going with you? And how do you see your business growing or slowing through COVID-19?
Yeah, interesting times for sure. In the near term, we're in a pretty good spot because almost all of our workers are remote workers anyway. We've got people all around the country, and so we just had to switch some of the people in the Melbourne and Sydney offices to working remotely. But all the systems, all the processes, all the companies are already set up for it. So it's basically almost business as usual for us at the moment, but having to work around some of those travel restrictions and COVID policies and things like that. The broader picture, who knows? As the economy sort of starts slumping in the coming months, as everybody's predicting, then who knows what the real scenario is going to be. The broader picture, though, and this is going to sound really controversial as a statement to begin with, is the coronavirus is probably the best thing when we get and look back in future. It's probably the best thing that's ever happened to the drone industry for those that come out of the other end of this, in business and still in good shape. Some of the things that Jen was describing there is we've just been seeing them play out on exactly the same scale for us. Is we've spent 7 years now trying to get people on board with this whole idea of remote data, that you don't have to go out to site. You don't need to be on site to view, measure, assess things anymore. And we've been advocating this for ages, and we get really good responses from people who get it, but they either get it from a safety perspective or a cost reduction perspective or the better result perspective. Like, there's all these different things that come to it, but now suddenly it's the only way they can do it. So they're being dragged into it, and they're going to start to see those benefits that we've been sort of, touting and beating people over the head with for all these years. It's like, look, there's a better way of doing it. And now it's the only way of doing it. So, for companies like us that are focused on that drone data piece, going out, getting data, processing it, delivering information and results to people, this is going to be a big boon for anybody that's operating in that space. Now, obviously, there's an impact in the short term just from the general economy, but it's going to put this in front of mind for a lot of people that just weren't aware of what's possible.
And they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And I always use the expression incorrectly. I always say adversity is the mother of invention, actually. It's when you've actually got to go up against something rather than just change what you're doing. So we had a comment there from Shane that he couldn't agree more. Disruption can be healthy to fostering creative thinking and problem solving. And I've been hearing echoes of this coming out of the medical industry, the telehealth boom that's now happening. A number of people in the UK that have then moved to Australia working inside our health system here have been tearing their hair out at the lack of tech and the lack of telehealth. And having sat many times with my child and babies in the waiting rooms of the GPs, just hoping nobody else in there's got measles, I'd much rather be able to have that conversation without having to put myself in a GP surgery waiting for an hour to see that GP. I think you're right, Andrew. I think the technologies that it's the carrot and the stick approach. Really, the drone industry has been a carrot for so long, and now finally the stick is starting to hit. It's that people are realizing that there are ways of changing. The concern I have, though, and what Jen mentioned and also what you mentioned, the legal process by which someone in a court would say, well, we have to do a site visit, just making sure that that's not mandated in any legislation that would then stymie any innovation.
Yeah, so for example, the work that we've done with the EPA, they have to be on site, even though they're literally standing next to us watching the drone. It is in the legislation that their rep has to be on site. And, so there's going to be other examples of that, which hopefully are going to get looked at a bit more openly coming out of this. Does that really make sense anymore? That legislation was written a long time ago. What is the purpose of somebody standing there watching as a drone flies around on the site?
With seeing a lot of the drones in across the world spraying chemicals and doing infrastructure assessments and taking thermal temperatures, have you been asked by anybody? People been asking you about this yet, Andrew, across your business?
Yeah, so it's not something that we focus on ourselves. We're much more on the data side of things, but a couple of the companies that we've been working with are definitely pushing ahead in that space and have asked us, if we want to be involved in terms of supplying, capability and pilots and so on. So yeah, it's not something that we're pushing, but that we're peripherally involved with if some of that goes ahead. I think there's definitely some good cases for it. We're a little bit strange in the drone world in that we're often talking people out of using drones rather than talking people into using drones. So some of that stuff sort of falls into that category for me of like, yeah, drones could be used, but why? If we're talking about humans touching things and that's how the virus is spread, well, people are on the ground. There's a lot of people out of work at the moment that can walk around with a sprayer, and you're at that ground level where people are touching things. So a lot of this stuff, I think, is sort of media and hype, and some of that's great. It's getting exposure for drones as a part of a solution. But for me, it's more about building that capability for future emergency responses when this might be done at a really broad scale. Doing a little test in one little area probably isn't going to move the needle very much. There are some niche areas, and they're the ones that we're looking at. So in terms of warehouses and things like that, rather than just broad spraying everywhere. Like, it doesn't quite make sense. You can do some of that more effectively with a ground vehicle or quite cheap people at the moment that are short on a job, being able to get out there and spray with traditional means. So it's about always using drones in the right way, where there's a definite value proposition behind it, rather than just because we can and because the media is interested in writing about it.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Jackie, talking about spraying, I see that you've been looking at spraying drones, and also training, that you've been looking at some new training aspects for the industry. How are things going with your business, and how do you see it growing as we come through this pandemic?
Yeah, look, things are really busy. We've actually been getting busier, which is great. I guess at this time, I mean, some of our work in the drone delivery space, obviously drone delivery is one thing that people are starting to utilise more and more, so that's getting quite busy. And also our work in the regulatory side, and pushing boundaries into that beyond visual line of sight space, remote command centres, and that is obviously people are looking at as well. I've got a little presentation, if it comes up. If it doesn't. Can you see that, Catherine?
Yes, we can. We can see the screen. Oh, beautiful Sydney.
So I thought I'll just do quickly so people don't have to see my face. But I guess prior to COVID, over the last 4 years in the industry, I've seen a lot of the industry move from research through to proof of concept, and especially over the last year or two, has been a lot of integration and utilising drones sort of as an everyday tool. I guess post-COVID, what I'm seeing, and I'm starting to see a lot more of, and where our focus is as a company, we're going to see a lot more automated drone programs. And that goes back to what Jen and Andrew were sort of talking about as well. People are starting to get used to drones, people not needing to be there physically and overseeing it. So I expect to see a lot of that. And a lot of work that I've been doing for a few companies at the moment is flying from home, or flying from a remote command centre. So taking it that one step further. This week I've been sitting in my office and I've flown a drone in Sydney, and I've also flown a drone in Israel. So that was pretty cool, and that was all doing that from the comfort of my home. So
okay, I want to know exactly what were you filming in Israel and what were you filming in Sydney?
They were both testing. So they were both trials for two different manufacturers, just seeing how it's working and all the connectivity and all the communications and the links and the all of that goes along with that. There's a lot of regulatory framework and back end to making that actually work and be a viable option. And then moving sort of to making these programs more effective and efficient, I guess the big thing I'll start to see is like one-to-many. So there'll be one pilot operating from home, but I could have 8 different sites across Australia, and I could be flying a drone in each of those 8 sites. So that's sort of what I believe post-COVID-19 is going to look like, and I think people's way of thinking. I used to think it was probably a year or 2 out, this happening, but everyone working from home and people's new way of thinking is definitely going to bring this quicker. Now, people are like, how are you going to get through the next, I don't know how long COVID sort of and the pandemic's sort of going to last and be in effect, but I guess how we're looking at, and we're sort of telling a lot of our clients, is be creative. Look out there. There's so many opportunities that, look, we have major cities where don't have people there. What can you do? Can you do inspections now in places you could never do before? So being very creative and thinking outside the box and being collaborative. That's one thing. I've always been a collaborative company. But at the moment, it's not cost effective for us to get to Melbourne or Tasmania to do a job. So working with other companies and building those relationships now is going to help all of the companies get through. We need as many drone operators and drone-related fields get through this so we can all grow as an industry. The next thing is, for the people that have a little bit of time right now, start utilising the regs and the manual standards to help you grow. So at the end, the manual standards, part of it's being released now, and some was delayed for 6 months. But in that, we've got options now that we don't need to get approvals to fly right near a controlled airport. You've got options to do tethered. You can just go out tomorrow and do something near an airport. You can do extended visual line of sight. There's also a lot of remote scenarios for beyond visual line of sight. So a lot of the regulations now, you can start developing those safety cases. So as soon as I guess the world's ready, you'll have all of that paperwork and the back end already ready to go. That's all. I'll stop sharing. Oh, you're on mute.
That worked incredibly well for a screen share. Yes, you noticed that I'm trying to talk away and I'm on mute, and I was just going, oh, that's amazing, that works amazingly, but I just don't know how to press the unmute button. There you go. No, that's really cool, Jackie. And it's like, when Qantas realised that they were going to have to ground originally 20% or 15% of their aircraft, what they did was they just brought all their maintenance forward. So this is a time where we are preparing. And I was actually really heartened to see the government putting some money towards reducing the cost of some studies, so people can, instead of just binging on Netflix, can actually, learn how to be a nurse, or learn about engineering, or, learn about environmental science, or something else that might be slightly more useful than binging Friends or whatever's on Netflix these days. And so this brings us to Rob, and I think this is great lead into some of the work that Rob's been doing. And so, Rob, really interested to hear projects that you're working on at the moment, and how you see your business growing after the pandemic. There you go. You can remember to unmute yourself, even though I don't. There you go.
So our business, I guess, has two sort of broad arms. One is the defence business, and the other is the non-defence business. The defence business, as Jen said, is starting to pull money forward. So I think the government is using it as a vehicle to stimulate spending in the economy. So there's stuff happening, particularly this month. We've seen quite a lot of uptick in requests coming through the kind of defence contracting space to do things. But obviously all of the projects, generally speaking, are just continuing as normal. So the defence projects have long lifespans, long lead-ins, and the only real way that COVID-19's disrupted that is forcing a lot of the project officers to work from home. So it's obviously tested the ICT infrastructure, but it's had the effect of making things a bit less Canberra-centric, which has been quite good. From the non-defence business perspective, a lot of the companies that we've been talking to from a leads perspective have said not now. So some really interesting clients, really interesting possible work, and they've said, look, the economic environment is too uncertain. We're trying to figure out if we're even going to survive this period, much less grow into the next stage. And so I think it was Andrew that said in the near term there's going to be that big economic shock to say that the money's gone, people are not spending, and it's going to take a little while before all of that comes back. But I think the trend that I'm seeing is that other than the economic impact, the broad trends haven't particularly changed. They haven't had this major shock where suddenly things that weren't possible are now possible. It's all been this trend, and I think that the effect that COVID-19 has had is to accelerate the existing trends. So all of the things that were issues beforehand, like the regulation, the lack of standards, making sure that things were safe and reliable to fly, as Andrew said, return on investment, privacy legislation, they're all there. They're not going to go away. They're not going to change as a result of this. And so they still need to be navigated. But there's an increased visibility of the potential that the drones have. People are seeing news stories about, like the pesticide spraying and the loudspeaker stuff that the WA police are doing. Those kind of pieces, and they're saying, okay, well, clearly there are lots of different applications for drones, and they can do a lot more than what we're used to. And for most people, their experience of drones is just simply, the hobby drone bought from the toy store, and they think, okay, well, it's just about a flying camera. But of course, it's not. They can do an awful lot. They do that really well, but there's an awful lot more that they can do as well. And I think people are seeing that a bit more. And so I think the trends that were there are going to accelerate a little bit. And as Jackie said, some of the things that she was expecting to see in a year's time starting to happen a bit early, primarily because of the visibility and because people are being forced to think about this stuff.
I mean, Rob, where do you see us as a country, Australia? I mean, you know that I'm a big proponent. I think we're all a big proponent of Australia leading the world in a lot of these applications, certainly as trial and test beds, certainly as some of our innovations that have come out of our universities and our startups and entrepreneurship. What's your taster for how Australia could potentially be a lighthouse location for a global drone industry?
I think we've got a really strong industry. I think the comments that Jen made about defence starting to pump money into the local industry, I think that's really important. It's really important to recognise that, you know, this is not a joint strike fighter. This is not a program that's going to require $200 billion to just do the engineering work to get an aircraft into the sky, and then each of those aircraft are going to cost however many tens of millions of dollars each. This is something that is well within our capabilities as a country. We have the companies now that can build all of the pieces that we need to make quite a successful industry, but it's not market-led in the sense that we can't wait for there to be a demand. There needs to be an organisation that's stimulating demand and that is pumping money into development and setting the goalposts for industry to follow. And I think we're quite lucky that we have quite an enlightened Defence Force in particular through things like the Defence Innovation Hub, where they are putting money into the industry. They're giving industry contracts, not huge contracts, not hundreds of millions of dollars, but enough to start a business, enough to continue your business with a degree of certainty and not have to worry about, okay, well, I've run out of money. I'm not going to be able to go for that next tender that I know is going to come in 2 years' time. Not have to worry about those peaks and troughs. It's a bit more level. So I think we're lucky that we've got a defence industry focus and we've got a defence force that's thinking about stimulating a local industry. I think that's really important. And the other thing, and I think Jen touched on this, is that there's a trend globally of manufacturing coming back from global locations to local locations, because the big thing that local companies can do that global companies can't do is be responsive. And I think that is really, really important in the drone space. So, we're not talking about products that are one size fits all. Every problem is the same in some ways, but every problem is unique. And what you want is an industry that's able to sit down with the customer, to work with the customer, to tailor solutions that are the right mix of hardware and software and data and people and process and all of those pieces to help generate those outputs. And I think that we've got a strong industry, we've got all of the pieces in place, and I think we're in a lot better position than a lot of other countries to really push and promote this to benefit us as a country.
Yes, I think Jen wrote a cracking blog about this. Jen, did you want to add something? I mean, that blog that you wrote on LinkedIn was really very astute around this particular point of how do we look at commercialization pipelines, but also actually ecosystem support, and not just from matched funding. I see so many grants these days that are all about matched funding. When you're looking for funding to do something that's new, you don't necessarily have matched funding. So, I mean, I'd much prefer work to grants myself, but we need all sorts of different finance models for startup, scale up, small businesses. What's your take on it?
I think one of the questions in the document that you sent around that some of the participants had asked was around what jobs are going in the drone industry, or like what the future of the drone industry is. And I think one of the things that's always helped me to be really successful is to go to a client and say, this is what I do, this is how I can apply it to you. I think waiting for the client to come to us and say, I've got this problem, can you please solve it? I think we need to be looking at what our customers' problems are and proactively talking to them about how we can solve them, because they don't know what drone technology does or how it works, or, they may have some knowledge, but they don't have that in-depth, really personal knowledge that we have around how they can solve the problem. So it's basic marketing, really. It's like if you understand your customer and you understand their problem, you can apply a solution to it that maybe they've never even thought of before. And I think that's really key, particularly in the defence and manufacturing industries. I've got a couple of clients who are now making, respirators, or making, they were welding parts for tanks 5 weeks ago, and now they're making isolation chambers, like they've just pivoted in a week, because they looked at a need and they thought, well, I'm going to chase that need. So I think as drone operators, it's really up to us to go to our clients and say, I know your business well enough. I understand all the problems that you're facing, or, can we have a chat about the problems that you're facing, and to really try and solve their problems. And, as you said, Rob, that's key to being Australian and being local. It's being responsive, but it's also about understanding the context in which we work as Australians in the Australian defence or manufacturing space, or in the agricultural space. Like, we have specific challenges that nobody else has, and no one can understand that better than the person who lives right next door to you. So
I think this is a good junction, Jen. You've reminded me we've got this list of questions to get through, and I think we've covered a few of them, but I'm just going to jump back here to one that talks about regulation post-COVID. I mean, we talk about all of our technical capabilities, but we've only ever been stymied, and I say that in the nicest possible way, because we are sitting in Australia, which has probably got one of the best regulators in the world. I'd say New Zealand's very, very good as well in terms of the sort of can-do spirit, and it's been a while since I've operated drones on the front line, so you'll have to maybe correct me if I'm wrong there, but even the FAA are quite happy to use Australia as a test bed, regarding our regulatory framework. Though, Jackie, you may even want to jump in here a little. That EASA do not think of CASA or the Australian system in such high regard as the FAA do, for example. So, what is the regulatory framework going to look like post-COVID? Is there something we can actually create rather than wait to hear back from the regulators around this?
Look, it's the time to push boundaries. The regulator is spending a lot of time on COVID-related approvals at the moment. So if you've got something in that space that's really pushing the boundaries, it's not just our regulator, but Department of Infrastructure, whoever it may be, this is the time to really push. They're going to have to be flexible. And we need the industries to keep coming, as you mentioned before, like some of the big people. If the international travel restrictions are there, it's going to still open opportunities up for international people to send a drone to, but for them to us to do all of the manufacturer testing and training. Australia does have a reciprocal agreement with the FAA, so for large aircraft for certification, so that is an opportunity. Unfortunately, EASA doesn't recognise Australia's certification, but there's definitely, look, it's going to be a struggle, and I hope that they're open, but there's definitely opportunities for us to push the regulator now. It's always harder for him to take it away from us after, so this is the time to do it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is, I'll sit here with I'll put my Australian passport off and put my British passport on and go, Brexit next year, 2021, will actually be Brexited. And Brexit, one of the things they are leaving is EASA. So, I mean, there's that whole UK-Australia relationship that I know Bojo was wanting to promote a few years ago. Do you see us having stronger ties with the British market? Jackie?
I'm scared when you're British. Yeah. Look, I mean, our focus is South Pacific and Asia Pacific, and I honestly don't know how all the borders and everything will open up. I think that's going to play with what our partners and how that all works. So I don't know. I don't know if anyone does, and how that whole international travel and all of that's going to work in the next year.
I think, Andrew, there's one here for you. Is there still money to be made with drones in the non-inspection section of the market? So, I mean, drones being used as data collectors or data distributors or data testers. Where do you see that side of your industry actually, where your industry actually growing in sort of the data side of the drone world?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, we talked about these general themes there were already themes that are being accelerated now, and one of those is just this move towards digitization of things, of everything, and there's been some really good moves in that area. I mean, one of our major client areas is the big engineering firms, and they're all pushing on this really, really hard for themselves and for all of their clients to do things digitally first before anybody does anything physically. Let's learn all the lessons. Let's measure twice or 10 or 100 times before we go out there and pour concrete or put an excavator in place. So there's vast areas of industry on the inspection and engineering world that are already pushing down this road. Then you've got things like the state governments and we're having that chat recently about the New South Wales spatial services. So they've put out their digital twin model, and the other states are doing similar things. So the government is getting behind it with this all of government approach, saying, listen to us, digital is the way to go. Look, here's a platform. We are spending lots of money as a government to put this in place so that everybody can start getting on board with that idea of digitization. So, that idea of going out and learning all your lessons at the cheapest possible stage, rather than as you go along all those steps in a project, the later you find out that something's going wrong, that, hang on, why is there a road over there when there's meant to be a building over there? Or why is all this stuff piling up at the gate rather than making its way to the laydown area? Whatever the mistake is that needs correcting, the earlier in the process you can do it, the cheaper it is for everybody, as well as the safety and all the other aspects that come out of it. So I've got this little slide that I use sometimes, which is the classic fast, cheap, good, pick two. And I've crossed it out to say, no, you can have all three, plus safety. So as long as it's the right case for drones, better, faster, cheaper, and safer. And so with Australia's incredibly high minimum wage, push from government and from our companies as being this smarter country that can do things better, it plays out really well with this whole idea of utilizing data to get better results for everybody, to be more efficient. One of the true or hidden technology stories of Australia that most people don't realize is the average farm out there is a guy and his son. They got huge, vast areas that 2 people are managing these days because they've got a $10 million robot that they don't call a robot. They call it, their tractor or their spreader or their harvester or whatever it is, but it's a robot. It can drive accurate to within a couple of centimeters back and forth across these vast properties. And then after this season, planting 10 centimeter rows, they do 5 centimeters to the left and they plant in between those rows. So we as a country are really good at getting technology and getting it out there. And that's sort of, these themes are all coming together at the moment, and realizing that drones, being this incredibly powerful data gathering machine, are a way of just pulling all these other industries along behind us with that.
Yep, I agree, 1000%. Farmers as well are particularly excellent at innovation, and it's something we're particularly good at, I'd say, here in Australia. Rob, I'm probably going to throw this one to you, and it's kind of 2 questions going into one. Someone asks, are we as UAV service providers actually a hammer that's looking for a nail? But also, how do you persuade, drone use case companies around the globe to extend their activities? And so I suppose this would be, how do we look at large organizations that would even usually use third-party providers are kind of bringing a lot of these things in-house? What are you kind of seeing across your clients?
So I think as an industry, we've got 3 challenges from a marketing perspective, and maybe other industries only have one of these. And our 3 challenges are firstly, trying to get people to understand that they can use drones in the first place. So there's a huge number of different applications. Drones are a tool, and almost any industry you can think of can benefit from drones in some ways. So it's firstly getting people to understand the possible applications of drones within their own particular organisation. The second piece is to get them to understand a little bit of the complexity of it. So I spoke before about anchoring on the $500 drone bought from JB Hi-Fi. That's not what this is about. There's a whole lot of other things to consider, and part of what we need to do as an industry is to get people to understand that it's not as difficult as manned aviation, but it's not as simple as just simply going down and buying one of these things and throwing it in the air. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to consider. So the regulation's one, and where the data goes is another one. And then the third one is obviously the thing that most industries do, which is pick me. I'm the right person, I'm the right organisation, I'm the right service provider for your needs. So from a marketing perspective, we need to do all 3. And from an industry perspective, we're at the beginning of a wave, in a sense, that one of the key things that need to be in place for this industry to expand is for the demand to be created. So yes, in some ways we are a hammer looking for a nail, because we know what the tech can do, we know how useful it can be, we know that we can have, as Andrew said, faster, cheaper, better, safer. But a lot of people out there don't know that. A lot of people out there don't know what drones can do. They don't know that drones, in some ways, are almost a necessity for their business to keep their people safe. They don't know how much cheaper they can be. They don't know all of the different things that they can do. And so part of what we need to do as an industry is to get that message out, is to convince people that, there's a huge number of applications for these things, and it's almost, at the risk of over-promising, it's almost only limited by their imagination. But whatever they think of has to be tempered by, as Andrew keeps saying, the return on investment. It doesn't make sense to go out and use a $20,000 drone system to go and spray if you can have some guys with backpacks walking around. That may be cheaper, it may be more efficient. You may not be changing batteries every 20 minutes. So you do need to go through the process of understanding exactly what the problem is and exactly what you're trying to do before you can come up with the appropriate solution. So I hope that kind of covers the question.
Hey, Rob, can I ask a question off the back of that? You're talking about, marketing as individuals, we need to be able to articulate our value proposition to our clients more effectively as individuals. But how do you think we as an industry do that? Because I know that, for example, getting approval to launch a drone at Brisbane Airport, I had so many people say to me, how did you get that approval? And I'm like, well, I got that approval because I've got good relationships in CASA and in the Tower in Brisbane. But not everyone has access to those things, So how do we as an industry or as an organisation in Australia, particularly a very specialised industry at this level of drone application, how do we as an industry communicate that value to clients at a broad scale?
Well, that's where organisations like Catherine's come in. The World of Drones Congress, particularly the fact that it's linked to robotics now, it's going to reach a much broader audience. Things like education in schools, and if a 15-year-old kid gets an understanding of drones, well, 5 years' time, they're going to be entering the workforce and they're going to be saying to their supervisor, hey, why don't we do this? I did it at school. So it's all part of an ongoing education process, and just building up a more and more critical mass of people seeing what these things can do, people having exposure to them. The work that you're doing, for instance, people see a video and they go, gee, this is incredible. This is incredible footage. How was it taken? And the answer is it's a drone. It's like, oh, I didn't think of that. I didn't think of that as a possibility. And, even just pieces like that can contribute to the overall understanding that we have as a nation and as a globe of what these things are and what they can do. And it's I think there was I'm going to get the quote slightly wrong, but it's the future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed. And I think there's a big element of that. We're dealing with a lot of the early adopters, the fast followers, but we're still at the very beginning of that innovation curve. And the mainstream haven't yet cottoned on to the value of this technology. And it will take, like every technology, it'll take some time.
I think there was a big turn in the industry as well when the health and safety legislation changed. I love the William Gibson quote there, Rob. The idea that we went from, just putting a person on a rope to do a level 1 bridge inspection, and you can see the Story Bridge in the reflection. I'm looking at it just here. The idea that you'd have someone dangling from a rope just to look at whether the screws were there or the paint was peeling is actually completely, nonsensical now from a health and safety risk perspective. If that's the only thing that person is doing, why aren't you using a drone to do that? Obviously, operational constraints existing in certain places. But I'm wondering if anyone here would like to jump in and maybe give us a bit of a summary or a thought piece, because there are some sort of questions that have been asked around CASA and the new manual of standards, how people are finding working inside those standards. Is that your interpretive dance there, Jen, about how you're feeling about the manual of standards? But also the health and safety rules, the insurances. Are you seeing differences in your drone insurances or things? I mean, how is the regulatory ecosystem feeling for the drone industry in 2020?
I feel like if I speak, I might never get a drone approval again through CASA. So,
what would your friend say, Jen, if a friend of yours was answering?
Theoretically, if I was talking about a friend, I might say that I don't believe that I think we have a very intelligent regulator. I don't necessarily believe that they've really flipped their thinking to thinking really fully about risk as they should be thinking about it. I think they're thinking about risk in terms of, let's make sure nobody dies, but I don't think they're necessarily thinking about risk in the true sense of risk, which is like, this is a risk. Is it an acceptable risk? How do we treat it? Can we just move forward from there? Like, it's, you know, when you submit a flight approval to CASA, it depends on who you get as to what conditions they want to see in your risk register. Like, it's not standardized. You don't know what you need to put in there. I feel like we could have a really intelligent conversation around genuinely standardizing it. And I think the only way to do that is actually to talk to the industry.
I actually disagree a little bit with you, Jen. Not to the full extent, but I mean, CASA's taken on like the SORA, for example. So they've actually taken on a risk approach, which is now standardised, and 56 countries around the world are taking that same approach. And now, if you want to do anything, if you want to fly over people, if you want to fly beyond visual line of sight in a city or over the ocean or whatever it is, there's guidelines in place now. So you can look and you can say, well, what assurance and what integrity do I need for that equipment? So it is starting to happen. Maybe it needs to move a bit quicker. But the standardization is there now. And yeah.
Yeah, just chip in on that. I mean, it just resonates really strongly with me, that determination of who gets that application is just such a vastly different story. Like, sometimes we'll put one in and we'll get an answer back straight away, like, yep, no problem, as long as you're doing X, Y, Z, off you go. We've had scenarios, we do a lot of recurring work, and we tend to discount that recurring work as we go, because the second time we go to site, you know, we're prepped. We've done all the safety assessments. I mean, you still update it, refreshing it, whatever, but you've done all the groundwork. You know what's required, and so we're discounting over time. So when we put in applications the next year for something that we were allowed to do last year and get told, no, you've got to rewrite all of that, it's a different scenario now. It's like, well, as far as I'm not aware of any regulatory change. Like, oh no, we're just doing this different process now. And so it depends who you get and, you know, which side of the bed they got out of that morning, as to whether you have a really easy or very, very difficult. And when I say difficult, I mean business damaging scenario or outcome from them. So yes, CASA's doing a very good job within with the hand that they've been dealt. Basically, they're in a really tricky spot. And one of the things I say to a lot of people is CASA's probably not going to be the drone regulator forever. Like, I can see this as an international thing, that there's going to be sort of a manned aviation regulator and then a drone aviation regulator, because they're being asked to do two completely different things: to stop A380s falling out of the sky and to stop a 1 or 2 kilogram thing from hurting people is just such a different thing. So that's one of my pet peeves, is that inconsistency and that inability for us to forward plan our business based on knowing what the regulatory outcome is for any given scenario. I think the thing that I would personally really love to see change is for them to step back and look at the risk minimization as a total minimization process. So when we put in an application, well, they're just judging our application on is that a safe thing to do. They're not saying, is it safer than an unlicensed operator doing it? Is it safer than somebody dangling off the edge of that bridge with a rope? So rather than saying, what's the safest way for this whole thing to possibly happen? And yes, AUAV, you can go and do that. They're only looking at our application in isolation. And a really good example of that's come up recently, and also speaks to CASA allowing things under the COVID situation that they may not have allowed previously, is we started a conversation around doing some work at hospitals. And it was a particularly urgent application to get additional ward and bed capacity into some of the Sydney hospitals, so they could open up new wards. They've just got, you know, water leaks and issues in these hospitals, and they want to get in there, assess it, get it repaired, get additional hospitals capacity there. So it seems like the perfect case, and CASA's like, yep, we can look at that as an accelerated application. We then got told by the client, oh, such and such, he's already got a permit for this, and we're going to give it to him to do. I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not the case, but, you know, just so you're aware, that's within Sydney Airport zone, and you definitely need a permit for that, and blah, blah, blah. And so I guess to step back and say, CASA spends a lot of their time holding the licensed operators' toes to the fire rather than minimizing the wider risk of the whole industry, and also in adjacent industries like physical inspection that could be done with drones if we're allowed to let the drones a little bit off the leash. I think allowing very highly trained, very specialized professionals a bit more wiggle room versus not chasing the cowboys and allowing some of the dangerous things to happen, I think there can be a bit more of a balance there.
I'd really love to see a risk assessment on operators rather than on the jobs that they conduct. Like if you're an operator, particularly if you've got a proven track record of safety and track record of doing these particular things, like you might have your first 1, 2 or 3 assessed at a really high level, but from that point you go, well, I've got a proven track record of safety in this particular area, so as long as I meet these conditions and I agree to always meet those conditions and I agree to no TAM it or whatever the requirements are for notification, I think that we should be looking at risk assessment from an operator perspective rather than a per job perspective, because it assumes that I as an operator am not smart enough to understand the risks that I'm facing on a job by job basis, which is just absolutely not true.
Yeah, and
sorry, Andrew.
I was just going to my final thing, and then I'll shut up. The people
we have 8 minutes left.
People that have been doing tens of thousands of these operations a year without incident are probably the safest people to say whether something is safe or not somebody in an office somewhere that if you handed a controller to them, they wouldn't know what to do. So I'd like to see that just balanced out a bit more. And mute.
Yeah. No, it's fine. I was about to say that, look, I mean, I know us as a company and what I've done for some of the clients, we actually have got a lot of those approvals through now that are just general stock bulk ones for the whole of the country. At the moment, you can do beyond visual line of sight by just doing a checklist. You can do it on multiple places in Northern Territory, Western Australia. The same with EV loss and things like that, or flying near an airport. I mean, you can get 2 years approvals on that without having to do that every time. It's just depending on how you write that safety case. So yeah, those are the things that I recommend people look at probably.
If you know the right people though, Jackie, like if you know the right people, because if you're not a proven operator and you don't know how to travel down that path, it's really difficult.
I guess that's why I have a company, and there's a few other people like Rob. There's a few consultants in Australia.
Perfect.
Helping that framework, and it's a good thing for people to do. I guess now, while their business is quieter, just sort of start writing and looking at all their procedures and work out how they can actually get the most out of the regulations.
I think the other piece with all of this is that globally, the unmanned systems industry is still new and it's still evolving. And part of the reason that there's this kind of, let's say, over-regulation with the standard type of operations, I think is because we're still getting used to what drones are, we're still getting used to what they can do. And when you start talking larger drones, more complex operations, larger drone fleets, there's almost a complete absence of knowledge about how to do that globally. So, speaking of standards, there's no standards on detect and avoid. There's no standards on how to certify a drone above 150 kilo. There's no standards yet on what training is required for beyond visual line of sight operators. So there's all of these planks that are still missing yet, because globally we don't, we haven't yet been able to do the work to kind of piece all of the puzzle pieces together. And as each piece comes in place, then we're able to do more. And as each piece comes in place, then I think the kind of standard operations that you're doing 1,000 times over will start to become kind of business as usual and wrapped up in a different approach. So I think it's kind of difficult now because globally we don't know all of the risks of this. And as we learn more, I think everything will become a bit more clear and a bit less difficult.
Got 3 questions that we need to get through in the next 5 minutes. So let's do like short, sharp. I love the chat. It's like we've just warmed up and we've just got to stop. So we'll have to do this again sometime soon. Okay, so one of the questions here is around somebody who's a mechanical designer that actually organises and produces customized payload solutions. So do you have client scenarios where you need customized payload solutions in a short time frame? I am a mechanical designer and would love to know how to get involved, and if so, where does one start if one is a mechanical designer of customized payload solutions? Who'd like to take that one?
I can sort of start and then I'll hand it over. there's a number of payload providers in Australia. So organisations like AVT, or there's FLIR representatives in Australia. There's Sentient Vision. There's a lot of different companies like that. And I think it was Jackie that started along these lines. It's all about collaboration and understanding who is out there in the industry, and where you would fit in that overall piece. So one of the things that we've been publishing is the Australian drone ecosystem map. Happy for you to email me afterwards, and I can send you a copy of that. Or if you like, help get, if you have a business, help get your business on that map. But it's also about forming partnerships with the drone manufacturers and the consultancy organisations and the service providers to say, how can I help you improve your responsiveness to the customer? And that's really what it's all about. And that's where the power of having a strong local industry is.
Yeah, and it's our manufacturers as well, like Carbonics in Sydney. They've got a great platform, and then anybody that they're looking at selling one of those aircraft to has a payload, and because it's a specialist piece of equipment, each one of those is going to need some specialist integration services.
Cool. Next question was, what could be improved in universities to be best equipped to training the next generation? I'm going to avoid answering that one.
Best place to answer that one, Catherine.
Yes. I actually think the education starts, like Rob said, at school. I think that's one of the things that we've got World of Drones education running for. And then, of course, then you've got specific training by people like Jackie around some of the new training that Jackie's going to be bringing out, which will be exciting. We'll have to have a separate conversation about that on a webinar, Jackie, when that's all good to go. Obviously, I am a board director at Aviation Australia, which you can get your REPL through. There are other suppliers. But Aviation Australia in the Queensland TAFE have recognised drone education for many years, and it's subsidised under the VET school support. So all Queensland students get a chance, if they want to get their drone licence for free, effectively, via the VET Assist programme, which I'm very proud to represent with my Aviation Australia hat on. Taking my Aviation Australia hat off and putting my ANU hat on, and looking at our universities across the country and what they're doing. I mean, ANU and I have a very strong relationship. I've just secured a position there as an associate professor in their research school of aerospace, mechanical and environmental engineering. And so we are going to be looking at how we can, as a university, help support the ecosystem for drones in Australia to make sure that we remain the best place in the world for the drone ecosystem, which comes around very nicely to our final question, because I think I deflected that all rather well. To what areas are lacking in the drone industry in Australia? What opportunities do we have from international collaboration? Which areas do you think we need support from federal, state or local governments? Which areas are just maybe past their best and are time to say goodbye to inside the drone industry here? Who'd like to take that one?
I might start with that one. Come back to what I said earlier. As I think this is not a supply problem. I think this is a demand problem. So I think we have all of the pieces that we need. And if you look at the drone ecosystem map, we cover off on a really large range of supplies into the ecosystem. But what's missing is the demand. And I think that's where the federal government can come in. That's where organisations like Department of Defence can come in, is to say, this is a really powerful technology. It has benefits across the board for safety, for efficiency, for increases in capability. And it's a technology that the government can take a lead on in stimulating the demand, in making, when they put tenders out, make them open enough that, a drone could provide the solution to whatever problem they're describing, rather than try and fixate on a particular answer. Or like the Defence Innovation Hub is doing, is opening up funding sources for the development of technologies so that we can grow as an ecosystem. And I think that's the stimulation of demand is really the piece that's missing.
I'd say possibly also looking at things that can be done more safely by drones and actually regulating it as a requirement. So one of the things I'm predicting is probably going to happen sooner or later is CAS is stepping in to rule out power line pulling with helicopters. So a lot of people die pulling power lines with helicopters. We've done some of that work with drones. You don't need to do it with helicopters anymore. So why allow people to continue being hurt or killed doing something when there's an alternative. So there's lots of cases like that where the regulations could actually step in and say, look, you can't do this with people anymore. It's just
and I think
a better way.
I think you've got to combine that with workplace safety regulators, because it may not be the point that CASA can do that, but workplace health and safety can certainly do that, Yeah.
Yeah, the full ecosystem. Jen, do you want to say some other things about your thoughts around the Australian drone ecosystem, and then we'll finish up with Jackie?
I think just going back to something that Rob said much earlier on, is that we're a hammer without a nail or something, hammer looking for a nail or something like that. I think it just goes back to my earlier point around, I think the customer has all the nails, they just don't know what they are or where they're hiding. I think it's up to us to just say, have you seen this nail that you keep tripping over 5 times a day that costs you $500,000 every year? I think that we are in the best place to actually point them out. I don't think it's because they're missing or because they're not in the ecosystem. They're there. We as experts have to point them out to our customers.
I couldn't agree more. And having worked in consultancy for 10 years, that was exactly what they paid us for, to be honest. They wanted us to see things outside of what they were able to see in their remit, and they wanted us to challenge, some of the aspects. But you're also right, and Shane has mentioned it here too, workplace health and safety trumps everything. I'm sorry, terrible noise in the background. Workplace health and safety, it trumps everything. If something's, not fit anymore, then that should be end of. It should just be end of, and people will get sued. And if we look at things like Enron, this goes all the way up to the C-suite, goes all the way up to the board level. And as a board director, I'll say that risk is one of the most important parts, if not the most important part. Yes, we have to work with fiduciary duty under the Corporations Act 2001 here in Australia, but your risk and your health and safety is the thing that you care about most. What I do as a director of a business. Jackie, you're working obviously with some big international companies that have established themselves very successfully. Google Wing, I hear, are actually oversubscribed and unable to deliver coffees fast enough in Logan at the moment. We've got lots of interest as well through the Congress. Every year we have more and more international companies looking to come into Australia. Where do you see the sort of benefits we have from the industry, and also where do we want to sort of protect our industry a little bit, maybe from international companies coming in, or do we? Is it all about collaboration?
It's all about collaboration. I think, like with what's happenening with COVID and the pandemic, I think we will look internally and collaborate first with Australians, because it's going to be easier to do that over the next little while. But no, collaborating with international companies is creating employment in Australia. So every one of these international clients, especially now that they can't travel, they're working with service providers, they're working with consultants to set it up, they're working with look, even yesterday I had to spend the day interviewing two new people, and these are two 20-year-olds that have never been in this industry that were let go. They were working in conference centres and things like that. So yeah, I think collaborating with international people and don't rule out them either.
Excellent. Someone was just thanking us there from New Zealand. We have really had a bit of an Australian regulation-centric chat today. I don't know if anyone, any of our panellists here want to comment on the CAA and the Part 102, if any work that you've done over in New Zealand. We've got a few people from New Zealand logged in today. I just remember when I was cutting my teeth on this industry back in 2012, that the CAA in New Zealand was just, the Part 102 legislation was coming in when our Part 101F, I think, was just really sort of being talked about. Is New Zealand the leading light in terms of international regulation for beyond visual and beyond line of sight operations?
Look, they're doing amazing. At the moment they've got a backlog. I think and hope the regulators aren't on. I think their issue is manning over there. I just think the approval time, they've got great pathways just like Australia, but it's just that time frame for New Zealand as well. I've actually got a lot of New Zealand companies coming to Australia for us to get the regulations through here beyond visual line of sight, get their hours up, because they have to have hours for New Zealand, and then the CAA actually do recognise a lot of our work in Australia. So they're actually going that path more than doing it in New Zealand first.
Could you see that they'd ever equivalate, Jackie? Could you, you get like your international driver's license, like when you're a British license holder, to translate straight to an Australian license, you don't need to do anything because it's a more rigorous test in the UK. Is there some kind of international legislation piece? Andrew, you touched on it a little bit earlier as well. Is that ICAO, or one of those organisations going to level that, or is Australia the gold standard that everyone else should be trying to reach?
Look, some of them cross over. A lot of the Pacific Island countries recognise either the CAA or CASA. So some of them you can cross over, still with a little bit of paperwork. But, I mean, right now, if we have, say, an international client come in from the UK, if we're developing their safety cases, we develop it to an international standard, the base of it anyway. Then it will have annexes for the different countries. But because a lot of countries are following that JARIS and that methodology, it does make it easier to flip between the countries and sort of have that one standard.
Great. I think on that, I will let all of our panellists maybe say a final word or thought. Starting with yourself, we'll go as we started. We'll start with Jen again.
I think that just going back to one of the questions that you asked before about university, I think that what I would love to see is to have drone operators and the regulator really adopt a risk mindset instead, because we're so focused on risk matrices, but actually it doesn't eliminate or control risk as effectively as if you have a risk mindset, which is, I think, a really different thing. And I think the SORA framework definitely speaks to that. But part of the education of being a drone pilot should be about how you fundamentally assess risk, not just of the bird that's in the sky, but what everything else that's happening around you. And as someone who's an expert in safety, there are some risks on site when I submit an application to CASA, and I just go, you have no idea the extra risks that I, as a person, introduce onto site by doing this work. And they're not assessing risk as a whole framework on site. They're assessing risk individually as a drone instead of what it means for the entire operation, not just the drone part of that operation. So to adopt a risk mindset for a whole operation, I think is going to be way more effective in future.
Interesting. Andrew, onto yourself for any final thoughts, please, mate.
No, I think everyone just look after, you've got to sort of shrink in a bit and make sure that your drone businesses are in a good spot for the next 6 or 12 months, that you're doing everything you can from a financial responsibility perspective to be on solid ground. But then just put your mind forward to this as actually being a quite a strengthening and a spotlight is going to be on our industry now as part of this solution. So it's actually a really positive time for everybody, as long as we get through it. And so let's all get through it together.
Thank you. Wonderful. Jackie?
Yeah, mine's still on collaboration. So we've got a real good opportunity. So it's just working together to get as many companies and as part of the industry through this, because we all do need each other to grow. And it's also sharing your story. I'd like to see more. We've talked about how do we market and everything. So having all of those people share their case studies and things will help the industry grow as a whole, not just your own business, but it will help create more work for the industry.
And last but not least, again, Rob.
Thank you. I'm hugely positive about this industry. I think we're only at the beginning of where this is going. There's a big wave coming, and we've only really explored the low-hanging fruit. I'm terribly mixing metaphors, but I think
it's all right.
There's we're only at the really beginnings of this, and there's huge opportunities, and the situation that we're going through now is just going to accelerate those opportunities, and the world in 10 years' time from a drone perspective is going to be hugely different. So massive opportunities, really positive signs for the local industry, and as Andrew says, is we will get through this and the light will be bright on the other side.
I have to say I subscribe to your optimism too, Rob, and one of the things that we've noticed with World of Drones and Robotics Congress, which we've added the robotics element to this year, just because I feel like drones and robotics on a Venn diagram sort of sit maybe 70 or 80% over the top each other in terms of opportunities, issues, and collaboration and opportunities, and also research funding and government departments don't necessarily separate the two things. And I also don't think you need to. All drones are robots, just not all robots are drones, right? If I was to say something slightly controversial. But we're very, very grateful to have everybody's time today on the panel. I feel like we are living in interesting times, to quote the great Curse. And we've moved the dates for World of Drones and Robotics Congress just in mind of potential local and international travel restrictions. We do still want to have a globally focused local conference here in Australia. We are the largest in the Asia Pacific region. I dare say we're probably one of the largest in the world in 2020, because a lot of other people are postponing now to 2021. So we will be on the 12th and 13th of November at beautiful Brisbane Convention Centre. And I would really like to hear from anybody who's watching today or even watching this playback on YouTube. If there are things that you want to see covered in that conference that you can't yet see on worldofdrones.com.au, please let me know. And hopefully you will see all of our lovely panelists either hopefully presenting at World of Drones and Robotics Congress as well. And if you know of anybody or would recommend anybody who would be a good panelist for a future webinar, please let me know. In about a month's time, we should be having one around high altitude drone solutions. Google Luna hopefully coming on board with that one. I'm trying to find a couple of other people again to get involved with that, because I feel like the sky's the limit, except it's not. The troposphere is not even the limit, right? You know, you've got to get up into the stratosphere with some of our drone solutions going on in Australia. And then we'll also, maybe the following month, we'll look at an education focused one and have a look at see how education, especially with people homeschooling with their kids, have they been flying drones as part of their homeschooling, which would be quite interesting to hear. So without any further ado, thank you so much to everybody for attending. Please let us know what you felt about the Zoom and how it all worked. And we'll hopefully be seeing you in November here in beautiful Brisbane. Have a lovely rest of the day, everybody. Stay safe, look after yourselves, and hopefully see you all in the pub soon.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you.